Welcome to the Subjective Professor podcast, where we reject coercion and hypocrisy. It's Friday, April 4th, 2025. This is episode 353, and we're going to talk about some of the tariff theories and Triffin's dilemma. Okay, the Trump tariffs are the talk of the town, as they say. What I didn't get to in yesterday's episode, because I went a little bit long, was initially a conversation between Judge Napolitano and Professor Jeffrey Sachs. And Jeffrey Sachs, of course, is a economics professor who taught at Harvard and now teaches at Columbia University. And he talks about how the tariffs are a tax, have to be done through Congress. And it's a very dangerous, tricky thing that in the process that he's using now. There is no economic rationale. There's no logic. There's no rhyme or reason. And 2 days ago, I mentioned that there is uh, a theory that Trump is or at least the plan that Trump is trying to pursue, is to bring production back to America, manufacturing. And in order to do this, he's got to weaken the dollar. He's got to weaken the long-term bond yields, because I mentioned earlier that in the next 4 years, $26 trillion are going to mature. And so they want to roll them into longer-term bonds. But of course, this whole process is going to trigger other problems like the yen carry trade and other carry trades that are happening all over the world. And so there's that problem. So they get into it. It was a recent episode. You can check that out. Today, Peter Schiff's podcast, episode 1020, title is April Fool's Day Came Late. And right, so he has a really great explanation of uh, what's going on about this tariff and why it will not work, right? And so he does give a favorable explanation of the Trump plan, or what people say might be the plan that Trump is working on. And then he says why it won't work. Great listen. He probably does it better than uh, I could ever do it. And so you might want to take a look at that. And so the conclusion basically is that it won't work. And so we have to continue to get ready for that worst case scenario. Monaco 64 uh, had his podcast today. The title was Trump Abandons America's Exorbitant Privilege. Check that out. And that's when he goes into Triffin's dilemma. So I'm going to explain it, at least read to you what is on Wikipedia with regard to Triffin's dilemma. So the way that the US dollar is set up, countries need to earn dollars, especially if you don't produce your own oil. And so Triffin's dilemma, what is that? So this guy Triffin, he noted that a country whose currency is the global reserve currency, held by other nations as foreign exchange reserves to support international trade, must somehow supply the world with its currency in order to fulfill world demand for these FX reserves, foreign exchange, that is. This supply function is nominally accomplished by international trade, with the country holding reserve currency status being required to run an inevitable trade deficit. And this is kind of interesting considering uh, everything that Trump has been saying, right? Like he's upset about the trade deficit, that it is evidence that everyone has been ripping the United States off. And then I continue. After going off of the gold standard in 1971 and setting up the petrodollar system later in the 1970s, the United States accepted the burden of such an ongoing trade deficit in 1985, with its permanent transformation from a creditor to a debtor nation, right? And so the United States used to be a big creditor nation. Now it is a debtor nation. So basically, people have to earn dollars by selling goods to America. This incentivizes people to move to where the labor is cheapest, not taking advantage of comparative advantage. And the main beneficiaries of this dilemma, of this setup of the reserve currency, is the top 1% of people in America. And this leads to the hollowing out of the middle class here in America because obviously everyone is producing stuff to sell to America so they can earn dollars. And so Manaco 64, he continues by saying that after 1981, it got a lot faster. And so the hedge fund managers in the United States today are the new robber barons. But the problem is they produce nothing, right? So they're just, it's a financialized economy. They're pushing paper around, they're enriching themselves, but there's nothing being produced. And so Monaco 64's theory is that, or understanding, is that Trump is trying to reverse Triffin's dilemma and perhaps maybe even go back to gold. So, in summary, basically, Triffin's dilemma leads to trade deficits. And that is something that Trump does not like. Whether he understands Triffin's dilemma or not, uh, and it seems to me that if he did understand Triffin's dilemma, why does he have to talk this way? Why can't he just say, hey, this is Triffin's dilemma, and then everyone would be cool with that. But no, he's got to talk in the way that he talks, keeps it a very, very low brow, low intellectual level kind of conversation, and it's irksome. It's annoying when he does that, right? Because it makes it seem like he's shooting from the hip. He doesn't really understand what's going on. And that's the thing. Is that really what he's about? That any kind of quote unquote success that he might have had over the last 100 days was purely accidental, or perhaps it was the result of people who are working with him. There's that problem. So this trade deficit, hollowing out of the middle class, a lot of the problems that we have today, this constant need for aggression and war, all of these things are related and made possible because of the world reserve currency status. Um, and so maybe Trump is trying to reverse Triffin's dilemma. Whatever might happen. I mean, who knows? There are so many theories, speculations, and every time I listen to someone, it makes a lot of sense. But then what do I know? And so, as far as I'm concerned, um, whatever happens, happens. And in the meantime, I'm just trying to figure out how to best prepare my family and the people who might listen to me to be ready for whatever might happen next, right? So hope for the best, prepare for the worst. And there are a lot of worst case scenarios, so it's very difficult to figure out just exactly how I might want to prepare. And that's part of the challenge, right? So I just want to wrap things up by talking about a recent Mises episode, Mises Media or Mises TV on YouTube. Ryan McMaken was talking about the tendency of governments to centralize and focus a lot of the power, to concentrate the power more and more. So local governments are what a lot of people would favor, but these localities get together and form larger localities. We'll call them counties. And then they turn into states, and the states turn into countries, and you have this system where a lot of people gravitate towards or eventually turn to centralization. And what that does is it focuses power and results in a loss of freedom for everybody else. So Trump actions, the things that Trump has been doing lately when it comes to foreign policy or the tariffs or an agreement with this person, this country or that country, it reveals the problem of one man rule, right? Or the great man problem. Not to say that Trump is the great man, but it's this phenomena where a lot of people will think that their leader is a great man. And this is not an unusual phenomena. It happens frequently throughout history where someone who is charismatic, someone who had some measure of success in one aspect of their life, people expect the same kind of success in all aspects of life. So this person should make a fantastic leader. And that's not how it happens. But uh, Trump, the way he's doing things now, and basically dictating and determining what is and what is not acceptable, greasing the wheels for things that he believes are good, and hindering the things which he considers bad. There's just too much power with one individual. And that individual, it's impossible for that individual to know everything, to control everything, to know what is best for everyone. It's just impossible. But it always ends up that way. One earlier example, and I've talked about this before, Pericles in Athens, just prior to the Peloponnesian War with Sparta, uh, had the same issue. Everyone looked to him as being a noble, intelligent person, a great leader. So whatever he says we should do, that's what we're going to do. And unfortunately, the way that Thucydides talks about Pericles is that he dropped the ball. He made a mistake. He fell into the trap of listening to the people, of becoming too arrogant about his own intelligence, and basically uh, does not acquiesce to the demands of Sparta, but rather a little bit of pride, a little bit of arrogance, basically accepts the challenge of war uh, from Sparta. And of course, it drags on and so weakens Greece that makes them vulnerable to outside invasion. And so here again, we have the same phenomena where one person has all of this power and he's rattling the sabers. He's saber rattling. He's talking about war with Iran, war with um, Yemen, war in Ukraine. I mean, there's war everywhere. And the US definitely is not in the position where it can fight all of these wars. There was that statement by the Iranian leader after someone in the Trump administration, or even Trump himself, threatened bombings, threatened to bomb Iran. And the leader of Iran said, "Oh, he says he'll do it, but he probably won't." And then right after that, there's that interview with a general who says, America is a person who's living in a glass house. There's 50,000 troops in, I don't know, 100 base or was numerous bases around Iran, and they were all vulnerable. So if the United States were to bomb Iran, then I think I've said that name of that country three different ways in the last couple of minutes, but nevertheless, you know what I'm talking about. If the United States were to start bombing Iran, then they would go after those bases, and the people on those bases would not be able to survive. In other words, they would destroy those bases. And so the number of troops who would be killed or hurt would be, shocking to America. But perhaps that's the reason why they're there in the first place, to become a temptation for a country like Iran, to bomb them, kill a lot of personnel in order to justify a war against Iran. Right. And so you have this weird situation where, uh, a great leader takes you to war, and then it leads to the ruin of the country. This whole phenomena is just so frustrating to watch, right? As individuals in a class at a school, you can see people who are partying instead of studying, people who aren't paying attention when something important is being said. Well, who cares about them, right? They're not going to do well, but you are paying attention. You're putting the hours to study. And so therefore you will be successful, right? That's what being an individual is all about. It's about the work that you put in. And we're able to do this because of the freedom that we have. But the more that we have a great man phenomena like Pericles, like Trump, again, not saying that they actually are, but that's the way they are being treated. The more you have one person declaring themselves the smartest person in the room, the more they're going to grab power, seize power, and it will reduce the amount of freedom that the rest of us has. And this is a very, very bad thing. Freedom is an extremely rare thing. You go all over the world and you talk about the freedom that exists here in the United States, and people are just shocked. They just cannot understand it. Um, and, unfortunately, a lot of the expression of freedom comes off extremely rude to the rest of the world. And some of it actually is, speaking as someone who learned the hard way a lot of Asian values, cultural practices. Once, after living in Korea for 3 years and then coming back, I realized that I became much more polite. Wasn't as emotional as I was when I was younger, and certainly a lot of the people that I went to school with. But I realized that that is more of a North American thing, that we just speak first and then think later. At least that's the way I was when I was younger. Um, but we could do that because of the level of freedom that we have. And then, depending on the reaction and depending on whether people stop talking to us or more people talk to us, then we change our behavior, right? Because of the consequences of the things that we say, we change as a person. We try to, well, at least we should try to improve ourselves as individuals. But over time, especially, today we went over FDR and his New Deal and all the things that he promised, turning a depression that could have been over in less than a year and turned it into a monstrosity of a depression that lasted 15, 16 years, right? He took away the individual's ability to respond, the individual's ability to make adjustments once the depression hit the country. And so that tradition of relying too much on the government, it exists today. Whenever there's a problem, people don't say, "How do we solve this problem?" They say the government's got to do something. Um, well, unfortunately, I think that, the conclusion that most of the people I listen to have said, even reluctantly, is that, all of this stuff that Trump is doing, it's not going to work. And when it all fails, it'll be unfortunate because it'll be put on Trump, and especially because a lot of the things that he's saying is clearly not correct. And so, even more so, people are going to lay this at the feet of Trump. And therefore, everything that he has proposed to do, everything that he, even the right things, the good things that he tried to instill and have passed in this country, it's all going to become associated with Trump and therefore bad and evil. And so what we need to do as individuals, wherever you are, and there's just a handful of you listening to this podcast, each of you have to basically understand as much of the idea and principles of freedom so that when things go sideways, you can stand up and be a guide. You can be a resource for other people to reorient their subjectivities, to reorient their perspective, to be able to see the way out, to be able to understand how to put things back together. Um, in other words, we stand up when other people need guidance. I personally do it even when I had nothing to say, right? And this is a typically American thing to do, where even when you don't really know what you're talking about, you are going to express your opinion. Well, fill up your mind with all as much knowledge as you can, so when things do go sideways, you can stand up and give people guidance. And that guidance that you're giving is going to be experience that you have, the knowledge that you have. I do it personally now in my family. I do it with my extended family. I do it with the people I go to church with, right? They look to me to understand what's going on in the world. And sometimes I say the craziest things, but when everything more or less turns out in the way that I said it would, people trust me more. And so the idea is that I know these people. I know what they will say if I say something. And so therefore I strategize. I think of a better way to present the information to them so that they'll be able to process it, understand it, and maybe even go along with it. In other words, we know the people around us best, especially the people who disagree with us. We know why they disagree. We know what they're fighting to protect and preserve. Well, you got to come up with a strategy to be able to talk to them, to maybe even guide them, ask them leading questions for them to work it out themselves. I mean, we know how their brain works. And so we got to challenge ourselves to not get emotional, not to get angry, not to get excited, overtly excited or depressed, in order to have that conversation, to guide them and lead them to a better place, right? There are some people who will never change, who will never give you the opportunity to talk to them about anything that they don't agree with. It's like they're junkies, right? Drug addicts, and they cannot stop thinking and doing whatever it is that they're thinking and doing, which is clearly not productive. But there are always going to be people who realize that something is off. Something doesn't make sense. And that's where you enter the picture, where you then say, well, this is why it doesn't make sense. It's because of this. And, I was able to do this in the college classroom, not because I knew the students I was talking to, like I knew them who they were personally, but I understood the college student. I understood what other classes were teaching them and how easy it would be to reveal that a lot of the things that my colleagues were saying were not necessarily true. And that was intriguing for them. It was the hook. It got them to sort of sit up and say, wow, here, there's an instructor who's not going to give me the same talking points, who's not going to say for the 50th time, you know, things that I've already heard for the last 4 years, and that's something, right? So like I figured that out. Well, each of us too, we have to figure out the patterns that arise in our conversations, right? Because for some people, it's always you go down the same road and people always go to the same arguments. Well, you gotta like disrupt that. You have to say things which are unexpected to get different replies, to get people to go, that's interesting, right? So there are always people out there who are on the verge, who just need someone to provide some information to fill in the holes of details that they need. And you'll do that. And hopefully, when everything does go sideways, more people will be able to stand up and guide people to a faster recovery rather than further decline into some sort of fascist dictatorship. Anyway, that's it for this episode. Hope you have a great weekend. I'll talk to you next time.